The Persona franchise is one of those series that doesn't seem to have a best game in the series that can be agreed upon by the entire fanbase. You'll find people who swear Persona 5 is the best, people who swear that Persona 4 is the best, and people who will say that Persona 3 is the best. I haven't heard anyone try to argue that the first two were the best ones, but that's to be expected. Those games were old and don't represent the modern day Persona franchise very well. My personal theory is that, with some exceptions, most people imprint onto their first Persona game. Whichever game you play first is much more likely to be your favorite over the others. For most people, that was Persona 5. For those of us who are loyal to our PCs, that was Persona 4. And to the real hardcore weebs, Persona 3 could have been their first. I think that most of the normies liked Persona 5, and good for them. We're happy that the normies had their fun. I think that those of us who prefer to be more critical of the stories we consume preferred Persona 4 for the characters. But as I started hearing more and more of the opinions surrounding Persona 3, I noticed that there were several people who crowned Persona 3 as the best of the franchise. These people seem to be more hardcore fans of Atlus and JRPGs in general, and I noticed these people were citing the game's story as one of the main reasons it's the best in the series. I remember hearing Schaeferillis Productions saying something to the effect of, Persona 5 has the best gameplay, Persona 4 has the best characters, and Persona 3 has the best story. And this piqued my interest for years while I waited for a viable PC port of Persona 3. I was really good at avoiding spoilers for the game, only knowing that the protagonist was a blue-haired guy and that the way that you summon personas is by shooting yourself in the head, which was so comically edgy I kinda loved it at the time. And based on what I heard about the story of this game, I was prepared to really enjoy my time with this experience. I was even prepared to see this game overtake my personal favorite Persona game, Persona 4. I'm giving you this context for a few reasons. Firstly, I want to let you know what my biases are going into this deconstruction. I really think that biases play a larger role in the Persona franchise compared to other franchises, and I can do everything I can to tone down those biases, and I can try to judge these games as objectively as I can, but I believe that's a little bit harder with the Persona games. But also, I'm giving you this context to set up a proper spoiler warning for this video. I am going to be going over almost every major story beat in this game. If you have been thinking about trying out Persona 3, even if you think there's a slight chance that maybe in the future you'll get around to playing it, don't watch this video. I will be talking about the remake of Persona 3, but this will broadly apply to all the versions of Persona 3, I'm pretty sure. I don't want my criticisms of this game to impact your potential experience with this game. You need to understand, there are a lot of people who love this game and its story. I don't understand those people, as I will try to lay out in this video, but it's important that you know up front that this opinion piece is going to be in the minority. Before you continue, if you haven't played this game before, please consider, do you want a video essay about a game that you haven't played yet to potentially taint your experience of what could potentially be your favorite game of all time? You should really consider turning back now, because you may not be able to unsee some of the issues that I bring up in this video. This is not a review of Persona 3's story. I hesitate to call it a critique, even. It's just me trying to put into words what I experienced playing through this game's story, and trying to work out what ruined my experience. Trying to get through each story beat while trying to wrap my mind around the fact that so many of you deem this game to be one of the best. So many of you seem to think that Persona 3 has a good story. A great story even. And I was so ready to have this experience and fall in love with this game. But for me, this was easily the most disappointing JRPG experience I've ever had. The beginning hour of this story is what really set the tone for me, and it was not in a very positive light. Our protagonist is introduced as a guy walking through a crowd of people, listening to music. While he's walking around, we cut to a girl who seems to be ready to put a gun to her head. I can tell there's supposed to be a tonal juxtaposition between the protagonist casually walking and this girl who is supposedly about to end her life, but it doesn't hit as hard because we already know that shooting yourself in the head is how you're supposed to summon your persona in this game, because it's all over the promotional material for this game. It's like the one thing everyone who hasn't played Persona 3 knows about Persona 3. Maybe if I hadn't known anything about the game beforehand, this juxtaposition would have hit harder. It's also a bit weird in retrospect, because it's clearly daytime when she's trying this, but the evoker should only be working during the dark hour, right? Whatever. She fails to pull the trigger, which is supposed to give me a sigh of relief, but again, the trailers ruin everything, I guess. So far, this opening animation is somewhat solid, barring the fact that the emotional weight is lessened thanks to the trailers. Our protagonist gets off the train at an empty train station a little bit before midnight, and then, as the clock strikes midnight, the sky turns to an eerie green. The protagonist doesn't seem to be bothered by this. And then, as he continues forward, as we transition from animation to gameplay, he sees puddles of blood lying on the ground. And then he sees coffins appear standing upright. And then he makes his way to the dorm. And then a ghost boy appears and asks you to sign a contract. This contract says that you are to accept full responsibility for your actions. And you have to sign your name. This is actually one of my favorite ways that a game has gotten my name from me, to be honest. And then the boy disappears. And then the girl from the intro cinematic appears to confront you. And then she starts vague posting on main. She reaches for her gun for some reason, but she's stopped by another woman in the back. And then the lights turn back on and the eerie green goes away. And then the lady in the back introduces herself as Mitsuru. The other girl asks who we are, which gives Mitsuru the opportunity to do an exposition dump so that we can stay a silent protagonist. The basic girl trope character for this game is Yukari, as introduced by Mitsuru. And then you are taken to your room with no explanation as to what just happened. And then you ask her about the boy, and she reveals that she doesn't know anything about him. Alright, so pause. Before I lose any of you, I need to make a very important point, because I'm sure most of you have noticed that my writing during this section of the video essay has been really rough. And I've done that on purpose. You see, as I was playing through this game, there was a lecture that I had seen that the opening of Persona 3 started to remind me of. It's this lecture by Trey Parker and Matt Stone. You may have seen it.
Each individual scene has to work as a kind of funny sketch. You don't want one scene that's just like, well, what was the point of that scene? We've found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word "therefore" or "but."
So when writing a story, it's best to try and separate story beats with either therefore or but. If you're separating each story beat with and then, you're probably writing a pretty boring story. This is honestly one of my favorite pieces of writing advice that I've ever heard. Persona 3 is a story that has some of the clearest and thens I've ever seen in a story. And I've been trying to emphasize that in my description of the story so far. If you don't believe me, go back to the beginning of the chapter of this video and rewatch it. How many times do I say and then? And how many times do I say but, or therefore, or something equivalent? Sure, I'm probably exaggerating a bit to make the point, but I could still feel these and thens, even though that lecture wasn't particularly fresh in my mind. You could argue that some and thens are acceptable, because if they connect the dots too soon, there wouldn't be much of a mystery to keep the player going. But in order for that angle to work, I think there would need to be some answers drip-fed to us at a steady pace as well. This opening bombards us with questions. Why is this girl trying to kill herself? I mean, the trailer kinda answers that, but let's pretend it doesn't. Why does the sky get green at 12? Why did blood spawn on the floor? Why did coffins appear? Why is there a little ghost boy? Why does Takaba not know about him? Why did we need to sign a contract? Why did the lights turn back on? Why did Takaba have a gun? Who is my protagonist even? Why are we here anyway? Why does the protagonist not seem to care about any of this? So many questions that need to be answered. But when I'm just being introduced to a story, and I don't have any attachments to the story, or any of the characters yet, and I barely have time to get all of my questions in order, I can't be expected to be invested in every single mystery going on. Too many mysteries makes all of them feel less interesting. If you gave me the reward of solving at least one or two of these mysteries, that rush of excitement could have been used to propel me onto the next mystery. There has to be a reward. It's kinda like training an animal. Let a few mysteries be solved first. If I enjoyed figuring out what was going on with those mysteries, that excitement can carry on to the next story beats. Don't drown me in questions right off the bat. Think about Persona 4's opening. There aren't really mysteries right away. The story gives you time to meet Dojima, Nanako, Yosuke, Chie, and Yukiko. It gives you time to explore Inaba right off the bat before the plot picks up. So when that first murder happens, I have reasons to care, because I had all that time to get settled into the setting of that story. Also, the blood and coffins hurt my immersion quite a bit. The blood just feels like an easy or cheap way for the game to come off as edgy. Wow, there's puddles of blood everywhere? That's so dark, bro. It's not even really explained as far as I can recall. They just put puddles of blood everywhere because they thought it was so edgy. They don't even really show up again or get explained. And the coffins are even worse to me. These are just like an edgy metaphor that only 14-year-old anime watchers would find deep and compelling. This is so on the nose. It's like a weeb's first metaphor. Like, yeah, that these are representations of people who are basically already dead even though they're alive, bro. The and them anthem doesn't stop here. I have lots of and thems in my notes, and I'm not sure how badly I want to sacrifice my writing to drive this point home, but here we go. If you want a drinking game for this video, take a shot every time I say and then. And then, after sleeping, Takeba wakes you up, and then they ride to school, and then you meet your teacher who gives you another exposition dump on your character, and then you go to the auditorium for a ceremony, and then a random classmate asks you if you're with Takeba because they saw you walking together, because it's an anime high school sim, so they have to nag you on whether or not you've been with Takeba so that 95% of the player base can fulfill their fantasy of allegedly having a girlfriend. And then, later in the day, a friendly student comes up to meet you. His name is Junpei, and he's the protagonist's bro trope character of this game. And he just kind of walks up to you and says hi. And then Yukari comes by too and explains that the reason Junpei came up to us is because he's just super friendly and he likes to act like he's everyone's friend. If that's true, I don't feel like that's shown off a ton throughout this story, and I always feel like it's better to show, don't tell in your stories. But even if it was true, that's a pretty weak way to introduce the protagonist bro character to the player. Comparing Junpei's introduction to the introductions of the other characters who share this archetype in the other Persona games, we have Ryuji, who encountered that palace with the protagonist at the same time, which is probably enough to start a friendship if the two of them have an experience that is that insane together. And then there's Yosuke from Persona 4, who gets a lot more development before we become his friend. We learn that he's irresponsible because he busts one of Chie's kung fu discs, we see him get kicked in the balls, he falls into a trash can a few times until the protagonist finally pities him a bit and helps him out. There are so much stronger introductions to these characters than Junpei's, who just kinda walks up to you. He's just super friendly, that's all you get. This character introduction needed so much more work in my opinion. It felt very lackluster compared to the other games. Anyway, back to the and thens. And then Yukari leaves to do something for the archery team. And then Junpei walks to the station with you because he's just so nice to anime protagonists, or I mean everyone. And then you part ways, and then make it back to the dorm. And then we get a cutscene between some guy we don't know and Mitsuru. They do some more vague posting and talk about something called apathy syndrome, which is yet another mystery for the player on top of everything else, despite the fact that we haven't figured any of the others out yet.
They say it's due to stress, but...
Yeah, right. It's gotta be them.
Oh yes, the pronoun game. The pronoun game is especially egregious in the opening of this game, man. It's gotta be them. Them, if you've never played a Persona game before, is obviously going to be the shadows, but for some reason, the writers don't want you to know about shadows yet, so they make the characters refer to shadows as them for the first 45 minutes of this game. On a second playthrough, this is so frustrating to listen to, because you know that these two would never just vaguely gesture about shadows by calling them in an actual conversation with each other. And it's even more pointless, because even if you don't want the player to know about the shadows yet, so that you can drive up the intrigue by adding more mysteries, despite the fact that we already have too many mysteries, you can still have the characters call them shadows because the player wouldn't know what that is yet. There would still be a mystery. We still wouldn't know what they were talking about regardless of whether or not they were playing the pronoun game. The pronoun game is redundant if you're trying to get more mysterious. And if the player already knew what shadows were from the previous games that they've played, it's not like making them a mystery by having characters vague post about them with pronouns would make solving that mystery any more satisfying. There are times when I think you can make the pronoun game work if it's used extremely rarely, but this game has the worst case of the pronoun game that I've ever seen in a narrative, and it's all in the beginning here. The writing gets worse and worse the more I go over it. Anyway, and then you meet Shuji Ikutsuki.
So, this is our new guest.
It was at this point that I suspected that Ikutsuki was going to be the twist villain. Maybe it was the clothing, maybe it was the phrenology of an anime twist villain I was picking up on, maybe the anime process of elimination was kicking in, but it felt like he was going to be a twist villain.
Good evening. My name is Shuji Ikutsuki. I'm the chairman of the board for your school.
And it was at this point that I now know Shuji is going to be the twist villain of this game. And I'm not joking, I had 3 friends who were in a call with me while I was playing this game who could back me up. I've never seen a more obvious twist villain in my life. Every time I saw him throughout the story, I just assumed that he was doing something villainous. I haven't consumed a lot of anime content, but even I have gotten familiar with the character tropes to the degree that I can just tell when a twist villain is here, because all of anime is just the same 12 characters over and over again. I spent the entire rest of the game hoping that I was wrong, that Ikutsuki's character was not what I thought it was somehow. I'm getting really tired of twist villains, you guys. I think we can write good stories without them, really. The only other noteworthy personality trait of Shuji is that he makes a lot of puns.
As they say, the early bird catches the bookworm. Get it? Bookworm? Because you're students? Clever, isn't it?
You'll get used to his lame jokes.
These puns are offensive to me. But they're not offensive to me because they're bad puns. Rather, they're offensive to me because I know that the writers are integrating puns into Shinji's personality because they think that the player will be duped into thinking that this is a good guy because only innocent good guys make stupid puns like this. When I see these puns, I see the writers insulting my intelligence, acting as though I'm stupid enough to think that because this character makes dad jokes, that'll totally convince me that this guy's cool. You're not fooling anyone, writers. We know he's a twist villain. Anyway, and then you need to go to bed early, and then there's a cutscene revealing that you're being spied on, which is great. There's more vague posting, and then another cutscene happens, this time to a random civilian. The clock strikes midnight, and so the dark hour happens. Everyone around the civilian becomes a coffin, and then he starts melting, I guess. And then he screams really loudly while the camera looks up at the moon because the animators don't want more work. I'm guessing that the point of this scene is to establish that if you don't become a coffin during the dark hour, you become a shadow or die or something, and that's supposed to juxtapose with our protagonist who doesn't melt during the dark hour, nor becomes a coffin. So this scene is supposed to demonstrate that most mortals can't handle the dark hour either way, but anime protagonists are just inherently good, I guess. This doesn't really get explored much further. And then Ikutsuki explains the dark hour to 2 people who already know what the dark hour is. He explains the dark hour to the protagonist again later on in the story, so I have no idea what the point of this scene is.
The dark hour occurs every day at 12 midnight.
Mitsuru and Takeba already know what the dark hour is. Who are you talking to, sir? It boggles my mind. Right, so they point out that our character must be experiencing the dark hour.
He may be asleep, but he's definitely experiencing the dark hour.
Which is something that they should have already figured out on the first night that we arrived here.
The only question that remains is whether or not he has the potential. Though come to think of it, he must. If he didn't, they would have preyed on him by now.
Oh look, more pronoun game. You can call them shadows. Please, just call them shadows. Our character apparently needs to be monitored for a few more days, which is weird because when the rest of the cast joins, they don't need to be monitored at all. But whatever. And then we have a cutscene in the Velvet Room, and then Igor, and then we wake up and go to school like nothing happened at all. There's just no consequences to anything that happens in this game. Things just kind of happen. And then Junpei shows up on the way to school, and I guess the game has just kind of given up on giving a reason as to why Junpei wants to be best friends with you specifically, and just expects me to accept the fact that we're best friends now. But I'm not really buying the he's just friendly to everyone explanation, because I don't see him spreading that around to everyone, only me. After school, Junpei asks if you want to hang out, and then you watch him play a crane game, except you don't watch him play the crane game because the game swaps to a black screen because the animators couldn't be bothered. I know this seems really nitpicky, and I'm not denying that animation is a lot of work, but immersion is really important to me, and stuff like this kills immersion so much. Show, don't tell, people. Show, don't tell. This is the opposite of show, don't. This is telling and not showing. And then you come home, and then Mitsuru tells you to go to bed early again, and then you fall asleep with your clothes on because it'd be inconvenient if some bad supernatural anime BS happened while you were in your pajamas, and the tutorial had to have you fight with anything that isn't your regular clothes. And then we get more Dark Hour.
Very interesting. Even those who have the potential tend to be unstable at first. Memory loss, disorientation.
If that's the case, why don't you monitor Junpei, Fuka, Ken, and Koromaru in the future?
But we're treating him like a guinea pig.
Oh, don't look at it like that. The two of you are classmates, right? Consider it an opportunity to have someone your own age here.
What? How does that address what she just said about being a guinea pig? Can you just reveal that you're a twist villain already? And then Akihiko comes through the radio. He's bringing a giant thing here. And then Akihiko brings it back and slams the door on the bad guy. And given that that thing out there was so huge and dangerous that it put Akihiko out of commission for a few weeks after this, I can't take them having a conversation in front of the front door like this very seriously. Are the stakes high or not? If it's so bad out there, this door isn't gonna help. I'm getting mixed signals on how serious this situation is.
Is it one of them, Sanada-kun?
Can you please call them shadows? Why?
Yeah, but not an ordinary one.
This shadow's not like other girls.
What was that? You've got to be kidding me.
Mr. Chairman, please head for the command room. Takeba.
Okay, guys, the building shook. That means the shadow is here. The shadow would have to be present for the building to be shaking like this. You are having a conversation with a huge, strong shadow right out there, and your animations aren't any different from when you have normal conversations, so I'm getting mixed signals as to what the stakes are here, and when that happens, my immersion breaks. Anyway, we're awake now, and it's a good thing that we just passed out without changing clothes so that we could fight the bad guys in our normal skin, and then Yukari gets you, and then she gives you a sword. The devs just didn't know when in this convoluted story that they should give the main character a sword. So they just felt like this was the best option they had, I guess. And Yukari was just like carrying around that sword this whole time, or what? And then they go downstairs and go to the back door. But then Mitsuru talks to them telepathically. Because sure, whatever. She tells you that there's more than one enemy. Please just call them shadows. And then the enemies start pounding at the door. I'm surprised the one at the front door hasn't come in yet. So then the game has you going upstairs, and as you're going upstairs through each floor, the shadows are apparently following you. But we don't see them, and as such, I don't feel a strong sense of urgency. It's another animators can't be bothered moment that kills the immersion. Show, don't tell. Please, I feel no high stakes for this sequence. So then we go to the top floor and go out the roof. And then she locks the door from the outside. Is that how roof doors are normally? I don't care. Anyway, okay, listen, we're about to get to the roof sequence, and I need to preface this scene with a few things. When I started playing this game for the first time, I was about an hour in at this point, and the idea that this Persona game could potentially be my new favorite had not really faded yet. I was still disappointed with how the cast had been introduced thus far, especially Junpei, but a lot of the criticisms I've laid out here in this video are much more noticeable on a second playthrough. I wasn't enthralled at this point, but I was still open and ready to have this game deliver a compelling plot. That basically changed after the sequence that we're about to go over. And you know exactly what I'm talking about if you've played this game before. As I've stated previously, one of the things that I knew about this game going into it was the fact that you shoot yourself in the head in order to summon a persona. I feel like a lot of people who played this game knew that detail beforehand. So one of my biggest questions I had going into this story was, how do the characters discover that that's how you summon a persona? Like, that's very dramatic compared to ripping off a mask or smashing a tarot card. So how does one discover this technology exactly? I mean, they can't just have the characters go into the dark hour, put a gun to their head and hope that their hypothesis is right? I mean, that would be ridiculous. How are the writers going to work this into the story? Keep in mind, at this point I did not know that they weren't real guns. Apparently they're evokers, which is different, I guess. They just look like guns, but I think my point still stands. Now, Persona 3 has a unique storytelling advantage to set up an explanation for this when compared to Persona 4 and Persona 5. That advantage is that they throw the protagonist into a persona operation that is already ongoing. This advantage wouldn't be perfect, but it would at least be enough to get the story going for the beginning. In Persona 4, the protagonist is the first party member who gets persona powers. Same with Persona 5. But in this game, there's already characters who are or will be in your party who have persona powers from before you enter the story. This means that the characters can just teach the protagonist how to use a persona. And thus, they don't need to come up with a dumb scenario in which your character plays Russian roulette with reality and anime logic. Just have Ikutsuki or Mitsuru or Akihiko explain how personas work for the protagonist, and narratively, that can work just fine. However, they haven't told the protagonist how personas work yet. They've had days to explain stuff, and they've told him nothing. They haven't explained the Dark Hour, they haven't said the word shadow, and they haven't said anything about a persona at this point. So the writers have had an advantage in their setting that they could have used for their storytelling, and so far they've decided not to use that advantage. So, okay, how are we going to learn that shooting ourselves in the head is a good thing? Here's the series of events that occurs. First, a giant creepy hand shadow crawls up the side of a building. Presumably, this is the thing that Akihiko was running from earlier. Yukari puts a gun up to her head like she did in the opening cinematic. Remember, we know what this means because we've seen the trailers to this game already, but our protagonist does not know what this means. Maybe to him, he thinks that Yukari sees no way out of this situation and is going to end herself so that she can have a quicker death, right? Why wouldn't you aim the gun at the bad guy? That's probably like the best explanation that he could whip up in his brain while this scene happens. So then, Yukari can't work up the courage to shoot herself again. And before she can pull the trigger, she gets smacked by the shadow, and her gun drops to the ground, conveniently right in front of the protagonist. And then the shadow walks away for some reason. I guess he's just really after Yukari and the protagonist doesn't matter to him as much? Not sure. Our protagonist does one of those anime determination grunts. Can you feel the determination, weebs? He's doing an anime determination grunt. And then we cut to the room with the big monitor, where Ikutsuki, Mitsuru, and Akihiko are for some reason, even though Mitsuru told Akihiko that they need to fight the shadow.
We'll stop it here. You're the one who led it to us, Akihiko, so I'm going to have you fight.
And even though the shadows were chasing us up the stairs earlier and ignored this room, even though it's on a lower floor, I guess? Could Yukari and I have hidden this room instead of going onto the roof this whole time? And Akihiko says, "It's here."
It's here.
What? What do you mean it's here? You let it here, remember? You had a fight with it? And you had to run home and slam the doors behind it? Did you hear the shadow bang on the building and then go to the computer room to watch the cameras until it was here?
It's here.
Even though you knew it was already here? What are you waiting for it to go on the roof? What are you talking about?
It's here.
Anyway, Akihiko and Mitsuru are just now deciding that they need to get into the fight, even though they said that they would do that earlier. But Ikutsuki does that stupid anime cliche where the master stops the experienced fighters from helping out the beginner because he knows that deep down in his infinite wisdom that the protagonist is strong, so he can do it on his own, and he really just needs a high-pressure situation to drive him to the point of desperation so that his true power can be realized. Despite the fact that he's obviously the twist villain, and that this anime cliche would probably mean more coming from a good guy sensei who isn't secretly trying to end the world.
Wait.
But that wouldn't mean much more, so this is still just garbage anime writing that makes no sense. The writers could have just had Akihiko and Mitsuru try and save them, but before they can, it's handled already by the protagonist. That makes at least some sense. But no, anime grunt time. There's a camera somewhere looking right at the protagonist somehow. Now it's his time to shine. So he picks up the gun that no one has explained to him yet, and then the boy from earlier gives him a vision, or possesses him or something, and then he puts the gun to his head and says persona really dramatically, even though he has not had any of this explained to him yet, and shoots himself in the head. And that's how he figures out how to use his anime Carl Jung powers. I'd really like to believe that I don't have to explain why this is so stupid, but I know that some of the weebs watching this have terrible justifications for what's going on here. There's one in particular that drives me absolutely insane. That is that earlier, the protagonist saw Yukari try to shoot herself, and that is what is supposed to give him the idea that he is supposed to shoot himself in order to do something good. He still wouldn't know what would happen, but don't think about that. First of all, I really need you to imagine that you haven't seen any of the promotional material for Persona 3 at all, okay? Put yourself in the protagonist's shoes. You do not know at this point that you summon personas by shooting yourself in the head. If you see her doing this, and you have a basic understanding of what a gun does, what's really going to be running through your mind? That she's trying to work up the courage to summon an anime monster? Or is it going to be that she's crazy, or that she wants a quicker death? Now imagine that gun slides on over to you, and you pick it up. Is your first instinct not going to be shooting the bad guy? Like, at least try that. That's what I would have done. I can tell you that my first instinct is not going to be firing it at my head in hopes that a Greek mythology character is going to come rescue me. There is absolutely no way that Yukari failing to summon her persona here is enough information to tell the protagonist that A, she wasn't insane or wanted a quick death, B, that that's an invoker, which looks like a gun but isn't really a gun, and C, that successfully doing this will give you anime powers. And if he somehow did get all of that information, he wouldn't have enough time to figure out the odds of whether or not he should actually believe that information to be true versus the odds of accidentally killing himself if he puts what clearly looks like a gun to his head. And he wouldn't have enough time to process the fact that he was going to go through with shooting himself in the head. And also, he wouldn't know what the word persona means beforehand either. I'm pretty sure this scene is indefensible virtually any way you slice it. Unless the protagonist saw the trailers to Persona 3 as well, he somehow saw a giant hand monster, saw Yukari try to shoot herself in the head in response, and somehow gathered from that it was a good idea to shoot himself in the head. Factor in whether or not it was more likely that he'd just end up dead, and learn the word persona. Boy, do I love anime. And what's most painful about this whole introduction to the main mechanic of the gameplay is that it was so avoidable, easily avoidable. We've been in the dorm for days at this point, and we've met Mitsuru and Yukari during the dark hour, so they know that my character needs an explanation as to what's going on. They've had days to give us an explanation. This would have been so much harder for the writers if the protagonist had to be the first to discover their powers like in Persona 4 or Persona 5. But in this game, the protagonist doesn't need to figure it out on their own. The writers gave themselves an easy way to explain the mechanics of the anime magic by having characters that already understood the anime magic, and they ignored that easy exposition they could have given that would have made sense in the context of the story thus far, in a way that actively makes the story worse than if they hadn't given themselves that easy get out of jail free card. Even if they had one character casually say something like, yeah, you shoot yourself in the head and it gives you a powerful persona the day before, casually, offhand, that would have maybe given the main character enough motivation to at least give it a try, even if he didn't fully believe them at first. That would have still had problems, but at least it would have been something. It's astonishing. This was a writing layup that they fumbled so hard. Look, I'll even whip up my own version of the story in a way that makes sense to me. After you meet Yukari and Mitsuru, they explain the dark hour to you, but hesitate to explain the gun that Yukari had right away. The next day, after asking Yukari a few times, because you rightfully don't feel safe living in the same building as a person who has a gun, she finally tells you it's not a gun and that it summons personas. You don't believe her, but Mitsuru backs her up. Then the next day, the main character finds himself in a situation where he's being chased by a shadow into a dead end. But Mitsuru has given him an evoker just in case he needs it last minute. He gets cornered and tries shooting the shadow, but that doesn't work. Mitsuru telepathically says, "You know what you must do. Do it now or die." And the protagonist is like, I don't have any reason to believe that this will work, but shooting the bad guy isn't working and I might die a slow, painful death. So even if she's wrong and I do kill myself here, I have nothing to lose at this point. So he pulls the trigger, and then all the anime magic happens. It's that easy, and I'm just spitballing right now. You could easily polish that up and make it work, or come up with something better. This could have been so easy for them. So yeah, this was the breaking point for me. When I saw this unfold, I knew this was not going to be my favorite Persona game anymore. This is like worse than when the BioShock guy decided that he would stab himself with a syringe without anyone telling him to. At this point, I am no longer trying to take this story seriously. Almost everything narratively is going terribly, and I can't justify hoping that it'll get better. Anyway, I didn't really finish explaining the whole Persona Awakening scene, did I? The protagonist summons Orpheus, except that Orpheus only exists for about 45 seconds before becoming Thanatos, which in the moment kind of felt like picking your starter Pokemon Chimchar, only for it to instantly evolve into Infernape in the middle of your first rival battle, without any opportunity for you to get attached to your starter in the first place. This is supposed to foreshadow the death character inside you that's revealed later in the story, but this foreshadowing completely disregards pacing. It introduces us to Orpheus with an incredibly dramatic entrance, and then rips him apart. Maybe if they peppered in this foreshadowing later on in the story, as we defeat more and more bosses, it could have made much more sense, but the thing that it's foreshadowing is dumb to me, so I don't even really care that much about rewriting it. Maybe just get rid of it. The giant shadow, or they, has kind of been standing there this whole time, letting Yukari lie there even though it had like 5 minutes to cut her in half, and then Thanatos cuts off his arms in a cinematic. And then Thanatos becomes Orpheus again, and then the other useless characters watch in awe, wondering what just happened. And then more shadows come out of nowhere, they show up so we can have a tutorial battle, and then you pass out, which is also pretty stupid to me, but whatever. I don't know if you pass out because of the battle, or if the game is trying to tell you that awakening your persona was so psychologically traumatizing to you that you had to go into a coma. But whatever. Now, this script is 10 pages long at this point, and I've only covered the first 45 minutes of the game, and my time playing this game was around 80 hours, so I have not covered even 1/80th of the game in this video so far. And I could pick apart the entire rest of the story in the same way that I have up to this point, but I don't think that's necessary, and I don't think that I have the willpower to do that either. Because if I did pick apart the rest of the story the same way that I have with these first 45 minutes, I would probably make a lot more mistakes because I wasn't invested in the rest of the story, and my interest of the story went down and down as time went on. I want to cover big parts of the rest of the story though, so if I make any mistakes, just know that I can't be bothered to care because the beginning of this game put me off so much that I couldn't be invested in the rest of the story to pick it apart properly. Time to go to the exposition room, I mean the Velvet Room. After that, we wake up 11 days later. Yukari gives us some more exposition and some explanations we should have gotten on day 1. Day 2 at the latest. She even drops the name of the bad guys for the first time in the game. Finally, we're done with the pronoun game that served absolutely no purpose and actively harmed the dialogue. The writers then thought that now was a good time to start giving some backstory on Yukari and how her dad died.
My dad died in an accident when I was little, and my mom and I aren't exactly on...
Lady, I just got out of a coma!
Sorry for telling you all this the minute you opened your eyes.
I want an apology from you and the writers.
Alright, I'm gonna get going. I'll let the others know you're okay. They said you could leave once you regain consciousness, so I think you're free to go home. See you!
Wait, really? I've been in a coma for like 11 days, and I can just get up and go home? The doctors don't need to check anything. What is the point of anything in this story? Now, I think the real reason you're put into a coma is not because the battle was tough or the gaining of the new persona powers was really hard for you, but rather I think it's so that the writers can space their dates out and they can have just the right amount of time to set up their story for the next full moon. Eventually, you get more exposition directed at your character, which makes the exposition from earlier redundant, but okay. You also get introduced to Sonata, which is great. We get the name drop of the group, which is abbreviated to 3’s. I think this is dumb, and I don't think I need to justify it. Just tell me, if you had to choose between joining a group called the Phantom Thieves or a group called 3’s, which one are you really choosing? This is where we get our first social link. Just so you know, I will not be criticizing the social links of this game. I think that social links are an inherently flawed storytelling device amongst all the Persona games, forcing each character to have an arc that splits into 10 segments exactly, while making each part interesting, having each segment work during any time frame that the player is in at the moment, and tying it to the central narrative is all really hard put together. I don't think any of the Persona games have completely gotten a handle on that system, and I don't really blame them for it. It's a Herculean writing task in my opinion. I think the social link system should probably be reworked. I'll be focusing on the main narrative for this video. Anyway, and then Sonata calls us in the middle of the night to introduce Junpei to the team. This is the most shoehorned character introduction I think I've ever seen. Apparently Sonata just bumped into him the other night, Junpei awakened to his power recently, and I guess all this just happened off screen, and he apparently got a full explanation as to what was going on. Like, they explained shadows, the dark hour, and personas to him off screen. Why didn't we get that explanation then? If you can explain all this to Junpei before he even moves into the dorm, why can't you even tell us what a shadow is? Anyway, Junpei is just here now. There was no interesting introduction to his character. He just wanted to hang out with you because he was friendly. There was no interesting introduction to him having powers. He's just here now. He's just like the dude bro character the writers had to put in the game, but didn't know how to add him to the story, I guess. And I know this game came before Persona 4 and Persona 5, obviously, so they may have refined these character introductions as time went on. But like, this is supposed to be the Persona game with the best story. What's going on here? This game is garbage. And then Sonata name drops Tartarus, and then it's the next day, and then the next day we get more exposition. I know that JRPGs are usually like this, but like, man. Akihiko was apparently wounded by the giant hand shadow, so he can't fight with us. He seems perfectly fine. You guys couldn't have added like an arm cast or something to indicate that he was wounded? The writers don't want you playing with Akihiko yet because they want to space out adding new party members to your team. So they come up with some explanation like he's super injured, but they can't even be bothered to make him appear as though he's been injured. We also get the reveal that Ikutsuki can't summon a persona for some reason. Don't question why, just accept it. This scene where Tartarus appears is pretty cool, I guess. Pretty neat animation. Anyway, I'm not going to be talking about the gameplay of this game, so I'm not going to be talking about Tartarus that much, but this is where the game decides to make us leader. Akihiko decides that the protagonist should lead the group. Now, this is something that is hard to get around, but the game has to come up with an explanation as to why you, the protagonist, can order everyone around in battle. So they make all of the characters tell you that you're a good leader. All of the Persona games do this kind of poorly. Persona 4 just kind of has Yosuke tell you that he wants you to be the leader. Persona 5 has a similar sequence, but they don't really give very good reasons. It's just like, yeah, you seem like you'd be a great leader or something. I'm not sure what the solution to this is exactly. Like, obviously it's hard to explain why a silent protagonist should be the leader when he can't express himself because he's a silent protagonist. My idea would to not make the main character a leader and just kind of not bother explaining why the characters are controlled by the player at all, and just kind of let the suspension of disbelief do most of the work. That has its problems, don't get me wrong, but it's so much better to me than having the protagonist be deemed leader by his friends he just met with no discernible reason. That takes the immersion out of the story for me a little bit more than the alternative. But this issue is even worse with Persona 3 compared to 4 and 5. There is no way that both Mitsuru and Akihiko would just let us be leader. They may not be fighting, but Mitsuru would probably still insist on calling most of the shots. We had one battle and passed out for 11 days. We are not fit to be leader when there are two experienced Persona users right here. The protagonist being the leader hurts the story in Persona 3 more than Persona 4 and Persona 5, in my opinion. We enter the Velvet Room and we do the Persona thing where the other characters can't see what's happening, but we can because we have anime protagonist powers, and the game doesn't really address this in any meaningful way, etc, etc. Then we have a bunch of JRPG tutorials for a while that I'll skip. I think we're maybe out of the opening for this game, and I don't really want to talk forever about every detail of this game because it's not how I experienced it. I was so toned out because of the terrible opening that I didn't bother thinking about the rest of the story very thoroughly, and I want that to come through in this video. So instead of going point by point, let's talk broadly about the characters for a moment, because characters are really important to me, and I feel like that's a big part of why Persona 4 is my favorite of the big three. It's very difficult not to compare these characters to other Persona games by virtue of this being the last Persona game that I played. For example, Mitsuru feels like she's the third lost sister of Makoto and Sai Nijima. She even rides a motorcycle like Makoto does. And obviously, if there was inspiration here, it happened the other way around, but this is the order that I played the Persona games in, and this is how I see the characters. Junpei is a really great example of a character that feels outclassed by both Yosuke and Ryuji. And I feel comfortable comparing these characters to one another because they are all very clearly trying to take on the same archetype. I don't don't like Junpei for several reasons. He feels very shoehorned into the story without any forethought. His introduction was so weak and random, with him just coming up to you and becoming your friend, or with him just being invited to join 3’s in the middle of the night randomly with no build-up whatsoever. It's like they just added him to the story last minute or something. Junpei has a really stupid arc where he's jealous of you after the first boss for some reason, and this feels very random and doesn't really go anywhere. He just kind of gets over it. It's an arc that feels more pointless than the Morgana arc everyone hates in Persona 5. He also has a side arc with Chidori, which at first made me wonder if the game was going to try and give him a twist villain arc. Like, Junpei's set up as a character who has nothing without his Persona powers. He doesn't feel like he has anything without his powers, which is exactly how the bad guy trio Strega feels as well. So when he started connecting with Chidori, I thought that they were going to try and tempt Junpei into joining their side so that he could keep his powers. That could have been pretty interesting, but no, instead they develop feelings for each other, I think. I'm not really sure. And instead of having Junpei go bad, they have Chidori turn good. I just remember not finding this side plot to be compelling at all. This eventually leads to Chidori's death, in which Junpei gets shot, but Chidori heals him somehow through the power of the friendship. And then she proceeds to have a dying sequence that goes on for so long that it kills any immersion. You know how Spider-Man dies in Avengers Infinity War? You know how his death takes so much longer than everyone else's so you could have that emotional moment, even though it sacrificed the consistency a bit? This Chidori death scene feels like that, but 10 times worse and on steroids. It's a full 95-second death, and it's way more melodramatic. I didn't buy their chemistry at all, and I didn't feel like they had built up a legitimate romance between each other. I actually think the writers would have had to begin their relationship much earlier in the game in order for that scene to hit hard. Like, I'm imagining before you even meet Junpei, he's already trying to make his move on her or something, and they develop a relationship that lasts throughout the entire game so that the pacing of the relationship actually works out, and so that the payoff can have a proper build-up to it. Or better yet, just have Junpei flirt with the dark side a little bit more. You already established that he's jealous of the protagonist for some reason, and you didn't do anything with that. You've already established that he feels like he's nothing without his Persona powers. Make Junpei the twist villain of the game, screw it. Having the dude bro character of the game switch sides would be the most interesting thing that the Persona series has ever done with its characters. You set him up with a particular direction, but you don't follow through, and I don't get it. Why did you set him up in this fashion if you weren't going to give him a payoff? Trying to look at the positive side of things, there are two things that come to mind to me. I like that he swings his sword like a baseball bat, because he used to play baseball and that's the only form that he knows. I love stuff like that, actually. I also think that his voice acting is really well done. The voice acting in this game generally is really great, if not exceptional most of the time. I think sometimes the voice acting is so good that it helps elevate some of the poorly written characters. That's actually how I feel about Akihiko, actually. He's got like the best voice, and it's very nice just to hear him. Unfortunately, I don't think he has a lot else going for him. I'm sorry, not sorry to compare him to future iterations of his archetype, but he very clearly is going off the role of the Emperor Arcana in future entries, the fan favorite character who isn't into girls and has an interesting hobby. And again, Persona 3 has the worst of these characters. Yusuke is an artist pretty boy who is happy to provide awkward moments, with a very pretentious tone and demeanor that in conjunction with his social unawareness makes him very endearing. Kanji is a gang member who has a secret flamboyant side. He acts tough, but he's also gay, and he doesn't know how to reconcile these two things. It's a very interesting dynamic. He's my personal favorite Persona character of all time. Akihiko likes working out. That's his thing. The way Yusuke likes art, Akihiko likes exercise. His joke is that he's always finding ways to get people to work out. The gang will be going on vacation to the beach, and he's thinking about setting up a workout at the beach for everyone. That's basically his whole shtick. Yusuke being obsessed with art is more interesting to me, because being a starving artist is compelling, and people can critique your art, and it ties back to his character in a meaningful way. But Akihiko just kind of works out. He's super motivated and likes to work out because he's super motivated and likes to work out. I don't have a lot to say about Yukari. Her dad died, I guess, and that's related to the main plot, but her character just didn't grab me at all. I often forgot that her dad died. Like, it would get brought up in the story from time to time and I'd just be like, oh yeah, your dad died. It feels like a backstory that was slapped onto her character to try and give her more relevance to the rest of the plot. Other than that, she's more bland than On was to me, and that says something. Mitsuru kind of felt like Akihiko, but instead of being obsessed with exercise, she's obsessed with academics. This, at the very least, feels somewhat related to her upbringing. I guess is cool. I like having a robot character. I like the idea of a robot being built to fight shadows, but because the best way to fight shadows is with a persona, she has to develop some degree of personhood just so that she can have a persona to fight shadows. That's an interesting idea. I'll talk about her more when we get to her big reveal though. There's also a dog in this game. Persona 4 has a teddy bear abomination, Persona 5 has this cat that keeps telling you to go to sleep, and Persona 3 has a dog. This dog is better than the other two animal characters by virtue of the fact that he cannot speak, and therefore cannot be annoying. Koromaru is a cool addition in that it felt like a creative risk. I like that you can walk the dog at the end of the night. That gives you an opportunity to get closer to a random social link. That's a cool idea. I wonder if it would have been better if Koromaru was tied to a more structured social link, not with Koromaru himself, but with a stranger that you meet at a dog park or something. But this is cool too. This dog having persona powers is a bit odd because Morgana and Teddy were anime creations, so them being characters with personas is more acceptable, but Koromaru is just a regular dog who might have some vague spiritual connections, I guess, but it still feels weird. I'm not sure if Carl Jung would have extended his psychological analysis to dogs, and I'm not sure what the implications of a dog having a persona are, like, can other animals have one too? But whatever. Also, Koromaru can't shoot himself in the head because he's a dog, so he has a special evoker made just for him. And this kind of means that we didn't need to make evokers look like guns to summon a persona, right? Which means we could have easily avoided the confusion in the beginning sequence by just not making them look like guns this whole time. Yukari would have had an easier time summoning her persona. We wouldn't have to ask why she has a gun when we first met her. The part where we put a gun to her head at the beginning doesn't need to exist, but I guess you're just supposed to forget about that by this part of the game. Ken is a weird one because he's a kid, like 10 years old, and he's just kind of dropped onto us without much of a warning. He's just part of the team now, sort of like Junpei. You know, in Persona 4, we meet most of the crew before they join the team, and that makes the characters so much better in that game. We learn who Naoto is before we even get Kanji on our team. This setup really helps make the inclusion of these characters more satisfying. I just wish that Persona 3 had this structure as well. Ken is just part of our game now. His big arc is supposed to be in context with the next character I want to talk about, that character of course being Shinjiro. Persona 3 had a lot of unique storytelling opportunities that Persona 4 and Persona 5 didn't have, because of the fact that you start off in the middle of an ongoing Persona squad instead of starting it yourself. The fact that there are already Persona users in this story can open up some story options that Persona 5 and 4 didn't really have. Shinjiro is one of these interesting ideas. Having a character who used to be a part of your team, but quit before you even arrived is a really interesting concept to me. Like, that was probably the most compelling mystery of the story to me, and seeing how the writers would get him to come back was something that I was genuinely interested in and wanted to know. Akihiko tries to get him to join again several times throughout the game, which is a nice build-up, but the payoff didn't really land for me. He rejoins because he learns that Ken joined 3’s, and he doesn't explain his reasoning beyond that, because that would probably spoil the reveal at his death scene, that being that he killed Ken's mom. But I feel like Ken joining 3’s would be more of a reason for Shinji to not join. The logic of, I didn't want to join your shadow hunting group because I killed someone's mom last time I was a part of that, getting overruled by the person whose mother I killed joined the shadow hunting group willingly, so I guess I can join now, doesn't really follow for me, or feel like a satisfying conclusion to the arc of trying to get Shinji to join. And also, I feel like his interesting setup is kind of ruined by the fact that he dies early. Like, it would have been more satisfying to me to see this character make it to the end of the story and regain his confidence as a Persona user instead of dying off. I guess I don't feel super passionate about this, but I wanted to like Shinjiro more than I did by the end of this game. The game's themes have to do with death, and that your time is limited, and each of the characters have to have some relationship to death in order for the story to be thematically cool. This probably means that we need an extra party member to die so that we can see each of the characters react to the reality of death and the impact that it has on them. So I guess Shinji must die. Both of Chidori and Shinji's death scenes are thanks to Takaya, who has a gun, and this really dampens the death scenes for me a lot because he has a gun, so he could just shoot again. Did he only bring 2 bullets to kill Ken? Could he not have taken the time to walk over and kill off Ken? Especially if he actually believed that he was the navigator at the time? The entire time Chidori and Junpei are having their melodramatic death scene together, Takaya just stands there watching it happen. Like, you could just shoot Junpei again, you know? And his partner is just like, yeah, there's no reason for you to be here anyway. Let's just screw off now.
Takaya, don't forget about your mission. You don't gotta waste any more time on him.
They actually are kind of impeding your mission. You have a full minute and a half to put a bullet in each of their heads, and bullets are faster than personas. You could win right now. All of them are focused on the stupid melodramatic death scene. You were standing there doing nothing the whole time. Just shoot them? I can't find these deaths to be compelling because I'm distracted by the fact that the writers had to make Takaya an incompetent villain so that the story could continue. Yakutsuki is revealed to be the twist villain to absolutely no one's surprise, but he's also just like the absolute weakest twist villain ever. He just kind of waits for the crew to wander to where he and Aigis are on the night that the dark hour is supposed to go away, and then he just tells everyone that it was part of his plan the whole time. Side note, I had absolutely no confidence that we had actually successfully taken out the Dark Hour for good at this point in the story. None of you did, right? None of the characters had any reason to be sure that the Dark Hour was gone. The premature celebration was so hard to sit through. You guys are so dumb. Anyway, Ikutsuki has Aigis do something to the cast off screen, and then the cast is all on crosses for some reason. I feel like setting up these crosses must have been a lot of unnecessary work. You probably could just tie them up and leave them on the ground instead of going with what I'm guessing is an edgy weeb metaphor that I don't care about. And then Mitsuru's dad shows up for some reason. And then Aigis is about to kill Mitsuru's dad, but for some reason gets a moral compass at this moment and can't follow through. And then they both get shot. Mitsuru's dad dies, Aigis frees everyone from their crosses, and Ikutsuki just kind of goes crazy for a bit and then falls off the edge. And I'm just left wondering what the point of this character was. That was one of the worst characters I've ever seen in a Persona game. Painfully obvious twist villain, terrible puns that were terrible in of themselves and as a cover for the upcoming twist. And when the twist finally happened, it didn't really mean anything and he just jumps off a cliff to end his own story. You feel no attachment to him like the twist villains of Persona 4 and 5, and you feel no betrayal either. He wasn't tied to Strega or anything like that as far as I can remember. I feel like we could have just taken his character out of the story, reworked a few scenes, and the story would be just fine. Part of the twist that Ikutsuki explains is that the whole time we've been killing these shadows during the full moon, we've actually been making the death shadow stronger, reawakening it, or whatever anime nonsense. Up until this point, we've been fighting bosses during every full moon, and the twist is that the bad guy, Ikutsuki here, actually wanted us to kill those bosses, because that's what summons the death shadow for some reason. And that video of Yukari's dad saying that we need to kill all the shadows was actually edited, and he was actually saying, whatever you do, don't kill those shadow guys. Ikutsuki just made a few cuts in Windows Movie Maker to trick us all. This twist is so dumb. It's so dumb. It's like the kind of twist that you come up with if you're making your story up on the fly, with no forethought. You can feel it, right? It's like the devs had a story up to this point of the good guys killing shadows, but then they got to the part of the story that needed a big twist, and they were like, alright, what big twist can we do? We need a big twist, yo. And then one guy in the back was like, what if we made it so that the evil shadows weren't supposed to be killed this whole time, and killing the big shadow bosses was actually what made the big boss awaken for some reason. And after everyone in the writing room passed around the blunt they were smoking, they had no better ideas and couldn't be bothered to come up with any new ones. So yeah, that's your anime mandated twist that we had to shove in here. Oh yeah, and then there's Ryoji. I don't have a lot to say about this character. He's introduced in the final fourth of the game or so. Maybe even later, because he shows up after Ikutsuki does his twist villain thing. I had a very difficult time caring about the story at this point. I was honestly baffled that the writers had the gall to introduce a new character this late into the game and expect me to give a crap about him. And I knew he was another mystery the writers wanted me to see through to the end, but I didn't. I wanted the story to be over. But here we are with another new character. He's introduced to your school, all the girls like him or whatever, Aigis doesn't like him for some reason, but everything's fine for a month or something. Apparently, the twist is that this guy is actually the 10 shadows put together. Death. He's a shadow. But he didn't know that because he had plot amnesia, so the writers could drag this on, I guess. So he was just a regular high school guy for a while, and then he explains what's going on because he finally remembers. Aigis was tasked to take care of this amalgamation of 10 shadows, which is Ryoji. So Aigis got into a big fight with him on a bridge. Aigis couldn't beat him, so she decided that she had no choice but to seal him away in a boy that was near the fight. That boy happened to be the protagonist. So the protagonist had the death shadow in him the entire time, which which is supposed to explain why Thanatos was a thing from the opening, and it's also why the little boy was a thing, because that little boy was also Death, and he disappeared when he killed the shadows, and the last time you talk to that boy is after you kill all the shadows, which made him into a teenage boy who spawned into their school with no questions asked, and now he remembers everything and gives the crew a little ultimatum. He says that the fall is coming. Nyx is going to kill everyone, and there's nothing that can be done about it. The fall is going to happen sometime before next spring. He says you can kill him, and that will make you forget what's coming so you can enjoy yourself until the fall, or you can just not kill him and deal with Nyx. And he says you'll lose for sure if you try to fight Nyx, but it's a JRPG, so we know we have the power of friendship, and this ultimatum doesn't really mean anything. Anyway, this whole thing, it's stupid. It's really stupid. Why is the big bad Death Shadow the result of a bunch of shadows fused together? Why couldn't Aigis kill him? Why did Aigis decide the literal only option was to seal him away in a person? What does it even mean to seal away someone inside of a person? Is that something you've had to do in the past on any other occasions? Could you have done this the whole time? Why wouldn't you have kept tabs on this person who has death sealed away inside of him? Wouldn't Aigis have told anyone about what happened? Why does Death become a little boy that can speak to the protagonist? Why does our protagonist not know about this? Or does he, and was he keeping it from everyone? Why does he become a teenage boy in the real world after all the shadows are dead? Why is he good to everyone if he's Death? How does killing him kill our memories? Why does the boy get amnesia? There's so many questions like this that pop up that just make me feel like this story is being held together by toothpicks and tape. It's just stupid. The only other thing that I really care to mention is the ending. I don't remember a lot about the story, but I remember finding the ending to be confusing. My understanding is the main character dies. I didn't see this coming, and I guess I didn't see this coming because the story was so bad that I didn't care to pay enough attention past a certain point, but I tried looking online to see interpretations of the ending, and I don't think that it's much clearer to anyone else. Like, I don't understand how he dies. He just kind of dies. Everyone tells him he looks sick, and then he lies down in Aigis's lap while everyone gets their memory back, and just dies for some reason. I get that the theme of this game is accepting the inevitability of death, but why does he die? I saw one video saying that he dies because when he uses his anime powers to restore the Great Seal, he took on so much power for one person to have, like Tony Stark using the Infinity Stones or something, except that Tony Stark doesn't die a few months later. Apparently, our protagonist would have died had it not been for his determination to see his friends that he didn't get to see because he died. But yeah, I don't think this makes a lot of sense. It just feels sloppily contrived. He did a super powerful thing to seal up a big bad guy, and that should have killed him, but he didn't die because the power of anime protagonism kept him alive. And then he dies on the day that everyone agreed to meet? Why? You know what? I don't care anymore. If you've watched this video and you still love Persona 3, I want you to keep the love that you have for this game. I just don't think that Persona 3 loves you back. I think that you deserved better than this game, and I think that we got better in the form of Personas 4 and 5. Games that certainly have flaws, but are better in terms of story and character. And I know that this game came out before 4 and 5, obviously, so we should expect that this is going to be the weaker link. But I need to remind you, the reputation around this game is that the story is phenomenal. Yeah, the gameplay loop that's present in every Persona game is here, and it's still fun and engaging, but the story is what I was excited to see, and I've never been so let down by a story in my life. I'm sure that I got some things wrong in this video, but even if I made a few mistakes here, there's so many problems with this game's story, I can't wrap my head around liking it. I think we all deserve better. I hope that I could at least provide an alternative perspective that you may have not heard before. If I'm lucky, perhaps it's given you some food for thought. I just don't think I'll ever understand how you all love Persona 3 so much.